It was one of those evenings when everything looked too perfect to be real. The hotel ballroom sparkled with gold light that danced off crystal glasses and silver trays. Soft laughter floated through the air, mixing with the sweet sound of a grand piano in the corner. Guests in elegant clothes moved between tables, greeting each other, talking about business, art, and money. It was a charity event that gathered the city's richest people, and they loved to be seen in places like this. The main attraction of the night was the pianist. He was famous, charming, and proud of it. He had performed in many cities, and people admired his talent almost as much as they admired his confidence. He liked attention, and he knew how to make the crowd adore him. Every note he played seemed to say, "Look at me. Listen to me. I am the best here." Among the people moving quietly around the tables was a woman who didn't belong to that glittering world. She wore a black uniform and carried a silver tray with glasses of water and wine. Her hair was tied back neatly, and her steps were light and careful. She avoided eye contact with guests, always polite but never noticed. To most people in that room, she was invisible, just another person making sure their evening stayed perfect. But she had a calm about her that was different. When she passed the piano, she slowed down just a little, as if the sound touched something deep inside her. For a moment she forgot the noise of the crowd and listened to the melody. Her lips moved slightly, humming a tune that didn't belong to the song being played. It was soft, almost like breathing, but it had something pure in it, something real. One of the guests near the piano noticed her and laughed. "She's humming," he said loudly. "Maybe she wants to join the performance." Others smiled and turned their heads. The pianist heard the comment and looked up. When he saw the woman with the tray, he gave a little grin. "Ah," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Do we have another musician among the staff tonight?" The guests laughed. The woman froze. Her eyes widened, and she looked down at the tray in her hands. She hadn't meant to draw attention. The pianist continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Come now, don't be shy. If you love music, you should share it. Would you like to play something for us?" A few people clapped and cheered jokingly. The woman smiled nervously. "Oh, I couldn't," she whispered. But her voice was too soft to reach them. Someone near her said, "Go on. It's just for fun." The pianist's grin grew wider. "Yes, just for fun," he said. "Come, play a few notes. We could all use some surprise tonight." The laughter in the room grew louder. The woman's hands trembled slightly, and she put the tray down on a nearby table. She stood there, unsure whether to walk away or to do what they asked. The crowd waited, half teasing, half curious. Then, for some reason she couldn't explain, she nodded. The sound in the room faded into surprise. Even the pianist blinked. He had expected her to refuse. She walked toward the stage. The lights were bright and her heart beat fast. She felt small and out of place under all those eyes. But there was a quiet strength in her step. The pianist moved aside with an amused expression and said, "The stage is yours." The woman looked at the piano. It was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen. Shiny black wood, smooth keys, and a reflection so clear she could see her own nervous face in it. She took a deep breath. Her hands hovered above the keys and she whispered almost to herself, "It's been a long time." Someone in the crowd laughed again, but it didn't reach her anymore. The moment she touched the piano, the rest of the room disappeared. At first she didn't play. She just pressed one note, soft and slow, then another. Her fingers remembered the distance between keys, the weight of sound. Then she started to play for real. It wasn't a famous song, not something people recognized, but it was beautiful. The melody was gentle at first, like the sound of rain on glass. Then it grew stronger, fuller, like a story that had been waiting too long to be told. Each note carried emotion, and though she didn't look up, everyone in the room began to feel it. The laughter died. The guests stopped talking. Waiters paused mid-step. The pianist, standing beside the stage, felt his smile fade as the music wrapped around him. It wasn't just skill. It was something deeper. Pain, hope, and love all mixed into one. Her fingers moved faster now, confident, alive. The sound filled every corner of the ballroom. People who had been checking their phones or whispering suddenly stood still. Some of them even forgot to breathe. The pianist found himself stepping closer, almost as if he needed to understand what he was hearing. He had performed in front of thousands, but this was different. The woman wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing because she needed to. In that music, there were pieces of her life, a life no one in that room knew anything about. The notes rose and fell like waves, carrying fragments of memories, long days, quiet nights, maybe the echo of dreams that had once seemed impossible. When the final note came, it hung in the air like a whisper that refused to leave. Then silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. It was as if the whole ballroom had forgotten how to react. Then someone clapped once, then twice, and suddenly the room exploded with applause. The woman looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. She had expected laughter again, maybe even pity. But what she saw were faces full of awe. Some guests were standing, others were wiping their eyes. The pianist himself was the first to step forward and bow his head slightly to her. "That," he said softly, "was not what I expected." She smiled faintly and whispered, "Neither did I." The host of the event came running to the stage, speaking quickly into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was quite unexpected. Let's give another round of applause to our surprise performer tonight." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Someone shouted, "Encore!" But she shook her head politely and stepped back. Her hands were still trembling, and she didn't know if it was from fear or joy. As she left the stage, the pianist touched her arm lightly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, genuinely curious now. She looked down and said quietly, "A long time ago." Before he could say more, she slipped away, returning to her work. She picked up the tray again, her heart still beating fast. People whispered and looked at her as she passed, but she didn't mind. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The pianist returned to his seat, still stunned. He couldn't focus on his next piece. His mind kept replaying her melody, each note sinking deeper into his thoughts. He realized that what he had witnessed wasn't just talent. It was truth. All evening, the guests talked about her. Some said she must have studied at a conservatory. Others thought it was luck, but none of them really knew the story behind those hands that had once dreamed of stages like this. Later, when the crowd began to leave and the music faded into the background again, the pianist stood near the door, waiting. He watched her clear tables quietly, her expression calm, almost shy. When their eyes met, he smiled, not the arrogant smile he usually wore, but something softer. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded. "You're welcome." Then she walked, away to finish her work, and he stood there still listening to the echo of her song in his mind. That night, as the hotel lights dimmed and the guests drove off in expensive cars, he sat alone at the piano. He tried to play something, but every melody felt empty. He realized that sometimes music isn't about perfection, it's about soul. And that woman, the one who carried glasses and smiled politely, had more of it than anyone he had ever met. Outside, the city was quiet. The stars above the hotel shimmered faintly, as if they too had listened to her song. Inside, the woman changed. Out of her uniform, folded it neatly and looked at her hands. They still trembled slightly, but there was warmth in her chest. For years she had hidden her music like a secret. Tonight, for a moment, it had found its way back into the world. She walked home under the streetlights, her steps slow but light. The sound of the piano still played in her head. She didn't know that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet imagine. She didn't know that someone had filmed her performance, or that soon the world would hear her story. All she knew was that for the first time in a long time she had played again, and in that moment she felt free. After the event ended that night, the ballroom slowly emptied. The sound of clinking glasses and cheerful voices faded until only the quiet hum of the lights remained. The woman stood near the back of the room, helping the other staff clean up. She picked up empty glasses, folded napkins, and stacked chairs one by one. Her hands still felt strange, as if they remembered the piano keys. The feeling would not go away. It was soft, but powerful, like a heartbeat that had just woken up after years of silence. When she thought about what had just happened, it almost didn't feel real. She could still see their faces in her mind, the shocked guests, the pianist's surprised eyes, the sound of applause echoing through the hall. For a moment, she had not been a waitress. She had been a musician again, the kind of person she once dreamed she would become. But that moment had passed. Now, she was back to wiping tables, quietly blending into the background again. As she worked, one of her co-workers whispered, "You played so beautifully tonight." The woman smiled shyly. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "Trouble?" her co-worker said softly. Everyone was amazed. "You should have seen the pianist's face," the woman chuckled. "He must have thought it was a joke." "Well, if it was, you showed them," her co-worker replied with a grin. They finished their work, and the woman walked home through quiet streets. The city lights shimmered on wet pavement, and the night air felt cool on her face. She thought about her past, the music lessons, the competitions, the teacher who used to tell her she had a rare gift. Those memories were so far away now that they felt like someone else's story. But when she played tonight, everything came back. Every note felt alive again, like her heart had been waiting for that one chance to speak. When she reached her small apartment, she placed her shoes by the door and sat on the edge of her bed. It was late, but sleep didn't come easily. Her fingers moved in the air as if still playing the piano. She smiled to herself. She didn't know why she said yes to that challenge. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was something deeper, something inside her that wanted to remind the world that she still existed. Somewhere across the city, the pianist couldn't sleep either. He sat in his quiet apartment with a glass of wine, staring at the piano in front of him. Usually, after a successful event, he would feel proud of himself. But tonight felt different. He kept thinking about that woman, the way she had walked to the stage with quiet courage, the way her fingers had moved across the keys. There had been no showmanship, no arrogance, just pure emotion. He tried to replay what she had played, but he couldn't. Her melody had been her own, something born out of her life, not from a book of notes. He realized something that bothered him deeply. He had mocked her. He had invited her up as a joke, thinking it would be fun for the crowd. But she had shown him what real music meant. It humbled him in a way no critic ever had. The next morning he called the event manager and asked about her. "The waitress," he said. "The one who played the piano. Do you know her name?" The manager sounded confused. "The waitress? I think she's part of the catering team. Why do you ask?" "She played last night," he said. "I need to speak with her." There was a short silence. Then the manager said, "I'll see what I can do." Meanwhile, the woman went back to work like nothing had changed. The hotel was busy again, full of people who didn't know anything about the night before. Some of the staff smiled when they saw her, and a few even clapped softly as a small joke. She laughed it off, but deep down a part of her glowed with quiet pride. That afternoon, as she was preparing drinks in the kitchen, the event manager came in. "Someone's asking for you," he said. She frowned slightly. "For me?" "Yes," he said. "He's waiting in the lobby." When she walked out, she saw the pianist standing near the window, wearing sunglasses and holding a cup of coffee. He looked different in the daylight, less glamorous, more human. When he saw her, he smiled awkwardly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. She shook her head. "No, not at all." He hesitated for a moment. "About last night. I owe you an apology." She looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I do," he said quietly. "I made a joke at your expense. I thought it would entertain people. But when you played, I realized how wrong I was. You didn't just play notes, you told a story. I haven't heard anything that honest in a long time." She lowered her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Do you play often?" She shook her head. "Not anymore. I used to, a long time ago. Life got busy. I had to work," he nodded, understanding. "That's a shame. You have something special. You shouldn't hide it." She didn't know what to say. Compliments made her uncomfortable, especially coming from someone like him. She just smiled politely. He continued, "I'm performing again next month at the City Theater. Maybe you could come. I'd like to hear you play again." Her eyes widened. "Me? Oh no, I couldn't." "Why not?" "I'm not ready for something like that," she said. "Last night was different. I don't even know if I could do it again." "You can," he said. "You already did." Before she could answer, another staff member called her back to the kitchen. She thanked him quietly and returned to work. The pianist watched her go, wondering why her story moved him so deeply. He left the hotel with one thought repeating in his mind. He wanted to hear her play again, not for entertainment, but to remind himself what real emotion in music sounded like. That evening, one of the guests who had filmed her performance posted the video online. They wrote, "A waitress was asked to play as a joke, and this is what happened." The clip began to spread quickly. People shared it on social media, amazed by the way she played. Within a day, it had thousands of views. The comments were full of admiration. "This gave me chills. She's incredible. You can feel her heart in every note." The woman didn't even know the video existed until one of her coworkers showed her. "You're famous," they said, handing her a phone. She laughed, thinking it was a prank, but when she saw herself on the screen, her smile faded. "Oh no," she whispered. "I didn't want anyone to see that." "Are you kidding?" her coworker said. "People love it. Look at the comments. Everyone's talking about you." She didn't know how to react. It was strange seeing her own face and hearing the sound of her own music through a phone. It made her nervous, but also a little proud. Still, she didn't tell anyone how much it meant to her. Later that week, the pianist called again. This time she answered. He sounded excited. "Have you seen the video?" "I did," she said quietly. "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I," he replied. "The world finally got to hear what I heard that night." She smiled softly. "I guess it was a lucky moment." "It wasn't luck," he said. "It was talent. And heart. You can't fake that." There was silence between them for a few seconds. Then he said, "I've been thinking. I want you to play with me at my next concert. Just one song. You don't have to decide now, but think about it." She laughed nervously. "That's too much. I'm not a professional anymore." "Maybe not by title," he said. "But you're more of a musician than most professionals I know." She didn't answer right away. The idea of stepping on stage again scared her. But part of her heart wanted it more than she could admit. That night, as she sat alone in her room, she watched the video again. She noticed how nervous she looked at first, and how her expression changed once the music started. She saw how people had fallen silent, how they had listened with real emotion, and she realized something. Maybe she had buried her dream too soon. Days passed and the video kept spreading. News channels talked about it, calling her the mysterious waitress with the golden hands. Music teachers, reporters, and even talent scouts wanted to know who she was. The hotel staff protected her privacy, but word eventually reached her. The pianist visited her once more, this time bringing flowers. "You don't have to be afraid," he said kindly. "If you join me on stage, I promise the world will see the real you." She looked at the flowers and smiled. "Let me think about it," she said. He nodded. "Take your time. But remember, some chances only come once." After he left, she sat by her small window, looking out at the city lights again. The sound of cars and people drifted through the air, but in her mind she heard the piano, the same melody she had played that night. It had become a part of her again. She didn't know if she was ready to face the world, but she knew one thing for sure. Music had never really left her. It had just been waiting for her to find it again. And somewhere deep inside, she began to wonder what would happen if she really said yes. Days turned into weeks, and the woman's life quietly changed in ways she never expected. She still worked at the hotel, still wore the same black uniform, and still carried trays from table to table. But everywhere she went, people looked at her differently now. Some smiled with admiration. Others whispered behind her back. It was strange, but also kind of beautiful. For once, she wasn't invisible anymore. Every now and then, she would hear someone humming the melody she played that night. It made her blush, though she pretended not to notice. What surprised her most was how many people seemed genuinely moved by it. The world she had thought had forgotten about simple, honest feelings suddenly seemed to crave them. The video kept spreading online. Comments poured in from people around the world. Some said her story gave them hope. Others said they had cried watching her play. She read a few of those comments when no one was looking and felt something warm bloom inside her chest. Maybe her music really did mean something. One evening, while she was cleaning up after another event, she heard the sound of the same famous pianist practicing in the main hall. His notes filled the air, smooth and perfect as always, but she could tell his playing was different now. There was less pride and more emotion in it. When he saw her passing by, he stopped and smiled. "Still working too hard," he said softly. She smiled back. "Someone has to keep things running." He laughed quietly, then gestured toward the piano. "Care to join me again?" She hesitated. "Not tonight. Maybe another time." He nodded understandingly. "You know, people keep asking about you. Everyone wants to know who the mystery woman is." "I'm no one special," she said. He shook his head. "That's where you're wrong." There was a silence between them that didn't feel awkward, just quiet and honest. He finally said, "The offer still stands. The concert next month, play one song with me. You don't have to do it for anyone else. Just do it for yourself." After he left, she stood near the piano, staring at the keys. She wanted to touch them again, to feel that spark she had felt that night, but she didn't. She was scared that maybe it wouldn't be the same, that maybe it had been just one lucky moment. The next day, as she was serving coffee to guests, a man approached her and said he was from a news channel. "We'd love to interview you," he said. "People want to hear your story." She shook her head politely. "I don't think I'm the right person for that." "But you've inspired so many," he said. "I didn't mean to," she replied gently. "I just played." She walked away before he could say more. She didn't want attention. She didn't play for fame. Music for her was never about showing off. It was something she carried in her heart. That night she couldn't sleep. The thought of performing again kept circling her mind. What if she failed? What if she disappointed everyone who believed in her? But another thought whispered softly. What if she didn't fail? What if she finally took back the dream she had lost years ago? She sat at her small table, her fingers tracing the edge of an old photo she kept in a drawer. It was her years ago, sitting at a piano during a competition. Her eyes back then had the same light she had felt during that night at the hotel. It made her smile and ache at the same time. The next morning, she called the pianist. Her voice was calm but quiet. "If the offer's still open," she said, "I'll play." He sounded almost relieved. "I was hoping you'd say that." He told her they would start rehearsing the following week at the theater. She felt nervous just hearing the word theater. It sounded so big, so far from her small, quiet world. But she had made up her mind. When the day of the first rehearsal came, she walked into the grand hall where the pianist was waiting. The room was empty except for the two of them, and the large piano at the center of the stage. The light coming through the tall windows made the air glow. He greeted her warmly. "Welcome back to where you belong," he said with a smile. She laughed softly. "I'm not sure about that." He sat down beside her at the piano. "We'll find out." They started slow. He asked her to play a few notes, then a short melody. Her hands trembled at first, but as she continued, the music began to flow naturally again. The pianist watched her closely, not as a teacher or judge, but as someone in awe. "Do you feel that?" he asked. She nodded. "It's like coming home." They spent hours practicing together. Sometimes they would stop and talk about the piece, what it meant, how it should feel. He told her stories about concerts, mistakes, and moments when he forgot why he played at all. She listened quietly, realizing that behind his fame he was just another person searching for meaning. As days passed, they became more comfortable around each other. He stopped seeing her as just the waitress who surprised everyone, and she stopped seeing him as the famous pianist who mocked her. They were just two people who loved the same thing, music, that spoke from the heart. During one of their rehearsals, he said, "You know, that night at the hotel changed me too. I used to think music was about being perfect. Now I know it's about being real." She smiled. "Perfection can't make people feel. Honesty can." They both laughed softly at that. Outside the theater, the story of their upcoming performance began to spread. Posters went up around the city, and online articles talked about the miracle pianist duo. People were curious about how a woman who worked as a waitress could end up sharing the stage with a world-class musician. Some doubted her. Others couldn't wait to hear her again. When she saw her face on one of the posters, she felt a wave of fear and excitement at the same time. "What if I'm not ready?" she asked herself. But every time she sat at the piano, that fear faded. The keys didn't care who she was. They just wanted her to tell her story again. As the concert day approached, rehearsals grew longer. They practiced morning to night, sometimes laughing, sometimes arguing about small details. But underneath it all there was respect. Deep, quiet respect. One evening, after a long practice, the pianist looked at her and said, "You know, when I first saw you, I thought I was doing you a favor by letting you play. But it turns out you were the one doing me a favor." She raised an eyebrow. "How?" "You reminded me what music is supposed to feel like," he said simply. She didn't reply, but her smile said everything. The night before the concert, she sat alone in the theater after everyone had gone home. The lights were off, but the moonlight spilled across the piano. She walked up to it, ran her fingers across the keys, and played softly to herself. It wasn't the song they had rehearsed, just a small tune she had carried in her heart since childhood. She closed her eyes, letting the notes drift into the empty hall. For the first time, she wasn't scared. She wasn't thinking about mistakes or judgment. She was just free. When she finished, she whispered to herself, "I'm ready." The next morning, as the sun rose, the city buzzed with excitement. Reporters gathered outside the theater. Fans lined up early, and photographers tested their lights. Inside, she waited quietly backstage, wearing a simple dress the pianist had gifted her. It wasn't fancy, but it made her feel elegant. He came over and smiled. "Nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted with a small laugh. "That's good," he said. "It means you care." She took a deep breath. "Let's just play." The sound of the crowd outside grew louder as the lights dimmed. The pianist walked out first, greeted by applause. Then, when he introduced her, the audience fell into a hush. She stepped onto the stage slowly, her heart pounding. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, but she kept her head high. She sat down at the piano, and for a second, time seemed to stop. The pianist nodded at her, and together they began. The first notes were soft and trembling, but then the music found its rhythm. Their hands moved in harmony, two stories blending into one song. Every note carried emotion, and every silence between notes spoke louder than words. By the time the piece ended, the room was completely still. Then a wave of applause broke out, louder than anything she had ever heard. People stood to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even crying. The pianist looked at her with pride. She smiled through tears she didn't even know were falling. That night was not just a performance, it was a rebirth. She walked off the stage knowing that her life would never be the same again. When the applause finally began to fade, she stood from the piano bench slowly, her hands still trembling from what had just happened. The hall was still filled with echoes of her music, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if it had been real. The famous pianist who had invited her to play as a joke was still standing nearby, frozen in disbelief. His expression was no longer amused. There was something different now, something almost humbled in the way he looked at her. The guests, dressed in sparkling gowns and dark suits, were whispering among themselves, their faces filled with surprise. Some had tears in their eyes. Others were clapping again, calling for her to play more. She looked around, unsure how to respond. Her heart was racing so fast it hurt, but she managed a shy smile and stepped back, whispering that she should return to her work. But before she could take a step, the pianist finally spoke. His voice, which had been filled with pride and confidence earlier, now sounded quieter, almost uncertain. He asked her where she had learned to play like that. Everyone turned to listen, waiting for her answer. She looked down for a moment, trying to find the right words. Her throat felt dry, and she swallowed before speaking softly, saying that she had learned when she was younger, a long time ago, before life changed. There was something in her voice that carried weight, the kind of tone that comes from pain buried deep within. The pianist asked again, gently this time, as if afraid to break the fragile air around them. She told him she used to dream of becoming a pianist herself once. Her mother loved music and believed she had a gift. She studied in a small community center where an old teacher would stay late after hours, letting her practice on a worn-out piano. She would spend hours there, losing herself in the sound. But when her father became sick, everything changed. Her family couldn't afford the lessons anymore. The money that once paid for her studies went toward medicine and rent. Her teacher offered to teach her for free, but she couldn't bring herself to accept. "Pride," she said softly, "can sometimes stop you from taking help when you need it most." After her father passed away, she had to leave school and work to help her mother. The years went by. Music faded into a memory she carried quietly inside her heart. The piano she used to play on was sold to cover bills. She stopped thinking about stages, concerts, and applause. The world didn't seem to care about dreams when survival became more important. But sometimes, late at night, she would still play, on a borrowed keyboard from a neighbor or even just tapping her fingers on a table, pretending to hear the melody in her mind. It was her secret comfort, something no one could take away. As she spoke, the audience that had gathered around her grew silent again. The laughter from before felt like it belonged to another world. The pianist's eyes softened as he listened. He realized how wrong he had been to treat her as a joke, to think that talent or grace belonged only to people dressed in fine clothes. He felt a heaviness in his chest, something unfamiliar, shame. He took a deep breath and looked around at the guests who were all watching him now, waiting for his reaction. Slowly, he stepped forward and said something no one expected. He apologized to her right there in front of everyone. He said he was wrong to make fun of her, wrong to judge her by her appearance, wrong to think music belonged only to people like him. His words surprised the crowd. It wasn't common for someone of his fame and pride to admit a mistake so openly. He extended his hand to her and asked her name again, this time with respect. She hesitated but told him. He repeated it softly as if memorizing it. Then he turned to the audience and said that she had just given them one of the most honest performances he had ever witnessed in his career. The guests began to clap again, but this time it wasn't out of amusement. It was genuine admiration. Some stood from their seats, giving her a standing ovation. She didn't know what to do with all the attention. She had never been in a moment like this before. For so long she had lived quietly, blending into the background unnoticed. Now every eye was on her, every heart touched by her story. The pianist suggested she sit again and play something else, but she shook her head gently. She said that one song was enough, that it was all her heart could handle tonight. He nodded, understanding that her playing had come from somewhere deep, somewhere not easily opened twice in one night. After the event, when most of the guests were leaving, some approached her to thank her personally. They told her that her performance reminded them of what real beauty sounds like, something pure and human, not practiced for fame or applause, but played out of love and loss. One older woman with tears in her eyes said she hadn't cried listening to music in years until that moment. The pianist stayed behind as well. When the hall emptied, he walked up to her as she was collecting empty glasses again, slipping quietly back into her job as if nothing had changed. He asked her if she still played anywhere else, maybe at another venue, or if she would like to perform again. She smiled sadly and said she hadn't touched a piano in public for years before tonight. He looked at her and said, "That should change." She laughed lightly, saying she didn't think anyone would want to listen to someone like her. But he shook his head firmly. He told her talent like that doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right moment to return. He then asked for a way to contact her. She hesitated again, unsure if this was another polite offer or something real, but his expression told her he was serious. She gave him her number, though still uncertain if he meant what he said. He promised he would be in touch. As he left, he turned back and said quietly that she reminded him why he started playing music in the first place. That night, when she returned home, her mind was still racing. She replayed the evening over and over, from the laughter that had surrounded her when he called her to the stage to the sound of the final applause that seemed to wash away years of silence. She sat by her small window looking at the city lights, and for the first time in a long while she felt something she thought she had lost: hope. The next few days passed quietly. She returned to her normal routine at the restaurant, serving guests, cleaning tables, and trying not to think too much about what had happened. But the memory lingered. Then one morning her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. When she answered, it was him, the pianist. His tone was calm but filled with excitement. He said he had been thinking about her performance nonstop. He told her he wanted to help her return to music if she would let him. At first, she didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to people offering her opportunities like that. She told him she didn't have the money for lessons or instruments. He interrupted her softly and said that wasn't the point. He wasn't offering charity. He wanted her to play again because the world needed to hear her. He invited her to his studio, saying there was something he wanted to show her. When she arrived a few days later, she was nervous. The studio was large, filled with polished pianos, microphones, and walls lined with records. She felt out of place, but he greeted her warmly and led her to a piano in the center of the room. He told her that this was where he practiced every day, and that from now on she could come here anytime she wanted to play. She was speechless. He explained that her performance had reminded him of what art truly meant. Not competition, not fame, but honesty. He said she had the gift to move hearts, and that was something not even years of training could teach. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. The sound was rich and full, like the one from the grand piano at the event. She began to play softly, unsure at first, but soon the music took over. He stood nearby listening, realizing again that her touch had something magical, something that couldn't be taught. When she finished, he smiled and said that she should never hide her talent again. Word began to spread quietly about her. A few of his musician friends visited the studio and heard her play. They couldn't believe that someone who hadn't touched a piano in years could play with such emotion. One of them recorded a short clip of her playing and posted it online. Neither of them expected what would happen next. Within a few days, the clip began to circulate widely. People from different parts of the world started sharing it, commenting about how deeply her music touched them. Strangers wrote messages saying her song had made them cry, that it reminded them of their own lost dreams. She didn't even have social media before this, so she was overwhelmed when the pianist showed her the comments. He looked at her and said, "You see, the world was waiting for you." She didn't know what to say. She just sat quietly, tears forming in her eyes. For years, she had thought her story ended when her life fell apart. But maybe, she thought, it was only the beginning of another one. That evening, as she walked home, she felt the air differently. It wasn't just another night anymore. The sound of the city felt alive again, somewhere inside her. The same little girl who once dreamed of playing on a big stage was awake, and even though she didn't know where this new path would lead, she finally believed she was ready to follow it. The next morning, when she walked into work, something felt different. The air seemed lighter, as if the world itself had shifted in some small way overnight. She didn't know that the short video clip of her playing had already spread across social media. People had been sharing it endlessly, calling her the waitress who played from the heart. By the time she started her first shift that day, millions of people had seen her performance online. Some even came to the restaurant hoping to see her in person, though she didn't realize it at first. It wasn't until her coworker showed her a phone screen that she finally understood. There it was, the video of her at the grand piano, her hands moving over the keys, her face half lit by the soft golden light of the ballroom. The title read, "When Humility Meets Talent." The comments beneath it were filled with kindness and awe. People from around the world were writing things like, "This made me cry," or "She reminded me that real music comes from the soul." She stood there quietly, reading, feeling almost dizzy. It was strange seeing herself through the eyes of strangers. The pianist called her later that day. His voice carried a kind of excited warmth that made her smile. He told her that journalists and producers had been calling him since the morning, asking about her, wanting to know who she was. He said that the world was reacting to her performance like something they hadn't seen in a long time. People were tired of artificial things, they wanted truth, and somehow her music had given them that. She didn't know how to respond. She kept saying she hadn't done anything special, but he reminded her that sometimes the simplest acts, playing with honesty, could touch the deepest parts of others. That evening, when she came home, she sat at the small table near her window, scrolling through her old phone. Her inbox was full of messages she didn't even know how to answer. A few were from music schools offering scholarships. One came from a music company asking if she wanted to record. Another from a journalist who wanted to interview her about her life. It all felt unreal. She had spent years in silence, working quietly, invisible to the world, and now everyone suddenly wanted to hear her story. For the next few days, the pianist helped her manage everything. He invited her to his studio again, but this time it wasn't just the two of them. There were cameras, microphones, and a few people waiting to record her first official performance. She was nervous, her hands shaking slightly, but he stayed beside her, reassuring her that she didn't have to pretend or act like anyone else. All she had to do was play the way she always did, from her heart. When she began, the studio grew still. Her melody flowed gently, calm yet filled with emotion, and once again, It carried that same quiet power that had made everyone fall silent at the event. When the song ended, there were tears in more than one pair of eyes. The recording crew clapped softly, moved by what they had just witnessed. The pianist turned to her and smiled, saying she had just recorded something that people would never forget. He decided to release the piece online as a duet, her on piano, him accompanying on soft strings. They titled it simply, "The Waitress and the Maestro." Within hours of the release, the song began spreading everywhere. People streamed it on platforms across the world. Radio stations played it during morning shows. News outlets picked up the story, calling her the woman who reminded the world of real art. Her photo appeared on screens she had never imagined seeing. Yet through it all, she stayed humble. She still lived in the same small apartment. She still took the bus to work. But now, when she walked down the street, people sometimes recognized her and smiled, saying how much her music meant to them. One evening, she was invited to appear on a television show to talk about her journey. She hesitated at first, unsure if she could speak in front of cameras. The pianist told her that this was her chance to inspire others, to show people that it's never too late to return to what you love. So, she agreed. When the day came, she wore a simple white dress and tied her hair neatly. She didn't try to look like a celebrity because she wasn't one. She was still herself. When the host asked her how it felt to go from being a waitress to becoming known around the world, she smiled shyly and said she still didn't fully believe it was real. She spoke softly about her past, about the struggles her family faced, and how she had given up music because life demanded it. She said something that touched everyone listening. Sometimes when life takes away your dream, it doesn't mean it's gone forever. It's just waiting for the right moment to find you again. The audience applauded, some wiping their eyes. That simple line became one of the most shared quotes online for weeks. After the show, she received more invitations to play at charity events, to perform in concerts, even to teach children who couldn't afford music lessons. She didn't know how to handle so many offers at once, but she knew she wanted to use her gift in a way that mattered. She decided to visit a small music school that supported underprivileged kids. The children had old keyboards and broken instruments, but their eyes lit up when she played for them. She told them her story and said that even if the world forgets you for a while, you must never forget yourself. Meanwhile, her friendship with the pianist grew stronger. They spent long hours in the studio, creating music that felt pure and emotional. He often said that she reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Fame had made him forget that feeling, but she brought it back with just one song. He arranged for her to join him in his upcoming concert, a huge event in one of the country's biggest concert halls. When he told her, she froze, unable to speak. She said she wasn't ready for something like that, but he looked at her with kindness and said, "You've been ready all your life. You just didn't know it." The weeks leading up to the concert were filled with rehearsals. Each time she walked into the grand hall, her heart raced. The space was enormous, the seats stretching into the shadows. She imagined the night of the performance, the crowd, the lights, and felt both fear and excitement. During one practice, she stopped halfway through a song, her fingers trembling. He placed a hand on her shoulder and told her gently that nerves were just proof that she cared. He reminded her of the night she played at the restaurant event, how she didn't think about the crowd then. She only played for herself. "Do the same again," he said. "Play because it's who you are, not because they're watching." On the day of the concert, the hall filled with thousands of people. The air buzzed with anticipation. Backstage, she could hear the audience murmuring, the sound of programs rustling, the distant hum of tuning instruments. Her hands were cold, her breath uneven. The pianist walked up to her and said softly, "Remember, this is your story. Tonight, you're not a waitress. You're a musician who never gave up." She smiled faintly, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the stage when the lights dimmed. The applause began softly, then grew louder. She bowed slightly, feeling the warmth of the crowd. The pianist took his seat beside her. The spotlight fell on the grand piano. The hall went silent. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then she began to play. The first note echoed like a whisper through the air, followed by another and another, each one carrying the weight of everything she had lived through: her struggles, her loneliness, her rediscovered hope. The audience listened in complete silence, as if afraid to breathe. The music rose and fell like waves, wrapping the room in emotion. By the time the final note faded, there were tears in many eyes. Then the hall erupted into applause so loud that she felt it in her chest. The pianist stood and bowed with her, but he motioned toward her, signaling that the moment belonged to her alone. She looked out at the crowd, overwhelmed. For the first time, she saw faces smiling not because of her uniform or her service, but because of her soul. When they left the stage that night, she sat quietly in the dressing room, holding a small flower bouquet someone had handed her. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, almost not recognizing the woman staring back. The pianist walked in, still smiling, and said simply, "You did it." She laughed softly, saying she couldn't believe it. He told her that this was only the beginning. As they walked out of the hall together, the city lights shimmered outside. The cool night air brushed against her face. She felt free, light, and alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The journey that had started with a joke and laughter had turned into something far greater, a reminder that no one can measure the worth of a person just by what they see. Somewhere deep inside, she had always been a musician, and tonight the world finally saw it too. The days following the concert felt like a dream she couldn't quite wake from. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. They stopped her on the street and cafes, even at the bus stop, just to tell her how her music had touched them. Some said her story gave them hope. Others said her performance had made them believe in miracles again. She listened to them quietly, smiling, though deep down she was still trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. It wasn't long ago that she was carrying trays and cleaning tables. Now her name was spoken on television, printed in magazines, and whispered with admiration by people she had never met. The pianist had been right when he said that this was only the beginning. Invitations began to pour in from music halls, festivals, and charity foundations. They all wanted her to perform. But instead of rushing into fame, she took her time. She wanted her next performance to mean something, to be a reflection of her journey, not just another concert. The pianist supported her decision. He told her that true artists never chase the spotlight. They wait until their hearts are ready to shine again. Months passed, and together they planned something special, a solo concert in the same city where everything had started. It would be held in a grand theater, and the theme would be the return of the hidden melody. The idea wasn't just about her comeback. It was about finding beauty in unexpected places, about the way life sometimes hides gifts in the most ordinary people. She spent hours every day practicing in the studio. The pianist guided her through the process, but he also gave her space to find her own rhythm. Sometimes she would play until midnight, the sound of the piano echoing softly through the empty hall. Each song she practiced carried a piece of her past, memories of her father's laughter, her mother's tired smile, the scent of the restaurant, the sound of clinking glasses. All those years she thought were lost began to turn into music. One afternoon, as she was practicing alone, she stopped suddenly and stared at the piano. The sunlight coming through the window fell across the keys, and for a moment she thought about the night when everything began, the night the pianist had asked her to play as a joke. She smiled at the memory. What had once been humiliation had turned into the most meaningful moment of her life. She realized something then. Life often disguises blessings as challenges. What she thought was an insult had actually been an invitation, a chance for her to find herself again. As the concert date approached, her nerves returned. No matter how many times she performed, the thought of standing alone on stage still made her heart race. But this time, it was different. She wasn't afraid of failing anymore. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. She only wanted to share her story through music, to reach even one person who might need to hear it. The day of the concert arrived quietly. Outside, the streets were covered in soft evening light, and the theater glowed warmly against the city skyline. Inside, the seats filled quickly. The audience wasn't just made up of music lovers and critics. There were waiters, cooks, teachers, and students, ordinary people who had been inspired by her story. Some of the guests from that first event were also there, sitting near the front, waiting to see her again. Backstage, she stood in front of a mirror, dressed in a simple gown. Her hands were trembling, but there was peace in her eyes. The pianist walked in, dressed neatly, and smiled at her reflection. He told her that no matter what happened out there, she had already done something rare. She had touched hearts without asking for anything in return. She turned to him and said softly that she couldn't have done it without his kindness that night. He shook his head and said, "It wasn't kindness. It was fate." The stage manager gave the signal. The lights dimmed. The murmur of the audience faded into silence. She stepped out and the crowd greeted her with a wave of applause. It wasn't wild or loud. It was warm, respectful, like the welcome of friends who had been waiting a long time. She bowed slightly and walked toward the grand piano. The same grand, the same shine, but this time it didn't feel intimidating. It felt like home. When she sat down, she closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. She thought of her parents, her younger self, and all the nights she believed her dream was gone. Then she began to play. The first melody was soft and delicate, like a whisper. It floated through the hall, wrapping around everyone in the audience. The second piece carried a gentle sadness, telling the story of her years away from music. Then the tone shifted. Hope began to rise in her notes the way dawn follows darkness. The music built slowly, carrying every emotion she had ever felt: fear, grief, love, joy, and gratitude. The pianist joined her midway through one of the pieces. His part was light and graceful, weaving perfectly with hers. The two of them played together like they shared one heartbeat. The audience was completely still, drawn into the story they were telling without words. Some people closed their eyes to listen better. Others sat with tears running down their cheeks. As the final song approached, she looked up briefly, scanning the crowd. Near the back, she saw a familiar face, her old piano teacher. The elderly woman had tears in her eyes, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. The sight filled her chest with warmth. She smiled faintly and played even more softly, pouring everything she had into the last few minutes. When the final note came, it lingered in the air, long and tender, fading into silence. For a few seconds, there was nothing but stillness. Then slowly, people began to stand. One by one, they rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, calling her name. She sat frozen, tears filling her eyes. It wasn't just applause, it was love, respect, and gratitude all woven into one sound. The pianist stood too, bowing beside her, his face lit with quiet pride. He turned to her and whispered that the world would never forget this night. Later, after the hall emptied, she walked onto the empty stage again. The lights were dim and the echo of the applause still seemed to hang in the air. She touched the piano once more, almost as if saying thank you. The pianist joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. They sat together on the stage floor, laughing softly like old friends. He asked her how it felt. She said it felt like coming home after being lost for years. He nodded and said that sometimes life brings us back to where we belong, even when we've stopped believing in it. Over the next few weeks, letters and messages poured in from people around the world. Some were from aspiring musicians, others from ordinary workers, single parents, and young students. They all said her story gave them courage to chase their dreams again. She read each message carefully, smiling, sometimes crying. She realized that her journey had become something bigger than herself. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about showing people that no one is ever too small, too late, or too broken to shine again. One evening, she visited the restaurant where she used to work. The same tables, the same smell of coffee and roasted food filled the air. Her old coworkers rushed to greet her, full of excitement. They told her they had watched her concert on television, and that the entire staff had cheered when she finished. She looked around and smiled, remembering the long nights she spent there cleaning up after everyone had gone home. She realized that those years hadn't been wasted. They had built her strength, her humility, her patience. Before leaving, she walked over to the small upright piano that sat near the corner of the restaurant. It was the same one she had sometimes touched lightly when no one was watching. She sat down and began to play a soft tune. The staff paused their work to listen. The melody was gentle and familiar, It was a thank you, a song for the place that had carried her when life was heavy. The pianist continued to work with her, but he always said that she had something he could never teach: sincerity. Together they performed in several more concerts, each one filled with the same emotion that had captivated the world. She also began to teach children in her spare time, especially those who couldn't afford lessons. Watching their small fingers move uncertainly over the keys reminded her of her own beginnings. Every time she saw them smile when they finally got a note right, she felt that same spark she had felt years ago when she first discovered music. Time moved forward gently. Her name continued to inspire people, but fame never changed her. She still lived simply, still took long walks by herself, still found joy in small things. One day during an interview, someone asked her what success meant to her now. She paused for a long moment and then said, "Success is not about how many people know your name. It's about how deeply you can touch one person's heart." The interviewer smiled quietly, knowing that was the truest answer anyone could give. As years passed, her music continued to fill halls and hearts alike. But no matter how far she went, she never forgot the night when everything began. The night a proud pianist had asked her to play as a joke. She often said that moment was proof that even the most unexpected turns in life can lead to beautiful places. And so her story became more than a tale of music. It became a reminder that every person carries a melody within them, sometimes hidden, sometimes forgotten, but never gone. All it takes is one brave moment, one unexpected chance to bring it back to life.